Well, the UN says 1 in 3 Palestinians is now going without food for days, and that more than 1,300 have died seeking aid since late May. Earlier, I spoke to ActionAid's country director, Jamil Sawalmeh, in the occupied West Bank about the current situation in Gaza.
Well, unfortunately, we've been seeing a horrific situation for the past 22 months. Unfortunately, it keeps getting worse and worse with the current conditions for the Palestinian civilians in Gaza that are facing a famine, engineered famine and starvation for the past 5 months, with the total blockade of the crossings into Gaza and the complete suspensions of the humanitarian operations inside Gaza. So unfortunately, we're seeing that the civilian population are paying the highest price now, where they're facing extreme challenges in securing the next meal for their families, and in addition, of course, to the lack of medical services, the disruption of all public services in Gaza, including water, where we currently know that only 12% of the water supply is actually reaching the civilian population in Gaza. Medical services are completely disrupted. The vast majority of hospitals have actually stopped working with the lack of medical supplies, in addition, of course, to the critical fuel that is very much needed to sustain the medical operations inside Gaza. So with the continuation of the current situation, we are seeing that the civilian population are more and more thrown into despair by the day. And we have seen horrific images coming from Gaza, especially for those who are trying to seek some aid. The very few trucks that have managed to get into Gaza, and as we know, the vast majority of them have not been able to reach their destinations because of the severe needs of the population there. We have seen that people in tens of thousands rushing to extremely dangerous combat zones to be able to secure some sort of humanitarian aid in the form of mostly flour, I would say, to provide for their families. So unfortunately, with the lack of a meaningful and direct political intervention currently, the situation will keep, unfortunately, getting worse and worse.
Jamil, we've heard from Israel saying that it denies blocking aid, blaming Hamas for disrupting distribution. But irrespective, we're seeing a lot more pressure being placed on Israel by its allies. Do you think that will make any difference in the short term in Gaza?
Well, you know, we've been consistently and continuously calling for an increased additional political and diplomatic pressure on Israel, because that's the only way where Israel is going to allow more aid into Gaza. Now, unfortunately, we have seen that Israel have used this as a tactic to mitigate international pressure. For example, the most recent tactical pauses that were announced by the Israeli army were only a way just to vent and absorb that international pressure on them. What we call for now is an immediate and direct political action by all third states, including EU member states, US, Australia, to use all what they can in their power to pressure Israel to secure unimpeded and unhindered access and continuous flow of aid in Gaza, because that's the only way we're going to actually deal with the consequences of the current starvation, and that is only to deal with the most imminent consequences of the starvation, because we know that there will be long-term impact on especially on children and women, because of the spread of diseases, and also the lack of nutrient foods for so many months is going to have a long-term impact on these children and women in particular. So to be honest with you, we are actually counting on public support, public solidarity, such as what we have seen recently in Sydney, of people taking to the streets demanding a stop to this genocide, and also increasing the Australian diplomatic and political pressure on Israel to stop, its blockade on humanitarian aid. And we know that thousands and thousands of trucks are actually piled up at the borders of Gaza, especially from the Egyptian side, and they are being blocked by the Israeli army. Despite the fact that they have, announced several times that they are allowing certain amount of aid to come into Gaza, but that's definitely not the volume that we want.
Jamil Sawalmeh, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Emma.